Hello and welcome to another edition of Economic Forum where we discuss various issues affecting our economy in Zimbabwe. Today we would like to discuss reindustrialization, which is one of the main pillars in the National Development Strategy 1. And among its several objectives, it seeks to restore manufacturing as one of the contributors to the gross domestic product up to 30%. And it also to create additional high employment in the country through manufacturing, so that the manufacturing sector is also increased from where it is now, and to increase the capacity utilization of all sectors of industry from where they are now. And to discuss reindustrialization, we've got economist Vince Musewe, who has got some ideas, who has got some proposals of how we can go about reindustrialization under NDS 1. Vince, welcome to Economic Forum.
Hi John, how are you doing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe you can begin by giving us an overview of where we stand right now with regards to industrialization, and then we're going to be looking at how we're going to move on within NDS 1.
Yeah, okay, thanks John. Let's start, I'm going to start with a historical background so that we can build up to see where we are. You see, colonial economies were fundamentally designed for export. What happened was that when Britain colonized us, they then identified the resources of the country, and the rule was that you export your raw materials to Britain, they get manufactured there, and then the product are sold back to the colonial market. So you'll see that the Zimbabwe's economy and infrastructure was designed as an export, a trading post, if I can call it that, for the colonial economy. And that is the economy we actually inherited, right? Obviously, during the UDI period, during sanctions, Ian Smith then came up with a strategy of actually stopping us exporting raw materials so that we could start to produce goods here. That's when the Ziscos established, the Sables, and all the other heavy industry and light industry in a bid to actually stop import of processed goods. Now, when we inherited that, we had a significant industrial base, although our production is continually been based on agriculture. Now, what happens is that 60% of our agricultural output used to feed the industrial base, and we used to produce baked beans, juices, and whatever, which were locally produced, right? Now, after ASAP, which was in 2008, there was a significant deindustrialization of the economy. In other words, all these companies, because of lack of investment and lack of technology upgrade, started to actually diminish their output, right? And this therefore led to deindustrialization and an increase in the import of finished goods. So we have a situation where, number one, we have an industrial sector that is no longer working. We have an agricultural sector that is no longer producing to feed the industrial sector. And we are now importing basically everything. I mean, we import tissues, we import toothpicks from China. And this kills the industry. So imports that are cheaper ended up killing industry. And when you kill industry, you're killing an employment base for a significant number. I mean, at its peak, the Zimbabwe industrial base used to employ 600,000 people full-time, which was a significant income generating wealth for the community, right?
In fact, Vince, from what you're saying, we've even noticed nowadays that we end up importing things that can be found here in Zimbabwe.
Absolutely.
You go to some of the shops where they bring apples, oranges, vegetables from our neighboring countries.
Yes.
When we are actually,
have
an agricultural country.
Yeah. And you see, when you deindustrialization, you're killing what feeds the income base of the country. You're killing jobs and you're killing livelihoods. So you have to reindustrialize. We have to now relook at the economy and say, how do we reindustrialize so that we can reduce the informal sector? Currently, the informal sector produces about 70% of our GDP. Informal sector jobs are insecure, they're inconsistent, they're subsistence survival, right? And they are basically not decent work. And according to our constitution, every Zimbabwean is actually entitled to decent work. So we have to reduce the informal sector. And the way we can do it is by beginning to reindustrialize so that we can attract the youth, which are making up 60% of our population, who are highly unemployed, and upgrade their skills so that we can create. So that is the background around why we must industrialize.
Yes. In fact, it's interesting that you mention that historical background, because the old folk will always have those fond memories about a canning factory, in West Nicholson,
Yes,
employing
yeah.
thousands of people.
Yes.
They'll talk about the Belmont industries in Bulawayo.
Yes.
They'll talk about the light and heavy industries in Harare.
Yeah, yeah.
The car manufacturing or
Willowville,
assembling plants,
absolutely.
in Willowville as well
Yes,
as in
in
Mutare
Mutare.
and so forth. And
Yeah.
you just explained the reasons before and
where
after
we are now.
independence.
Yeah.
So there you are. Vince, you have ideas
Yeah.
about how to resuscitate our industrialization.
Yes.
Let's go straight into them. What would
Okay.
you tell the Minister of Industry together with the Minister of Finance when proposing some of these changes?
Okay, the first thing we must appreciate is every time we export raw materials, whether it's mining or agriculture, things that are not processed, unprocessed goods, we are exporting value outside of the country. We could actually create that value locally. Let me give you an example. A kilogram of tobacco is $4 per kilogram if you go to the auction, per kilogram, okay? A packet of cigarettes is actually got about 20 grams of tobacco in it. You buy it for $1, right? So can you see the difference? We are exporting a kilogram at $4, and only 20 grams is put in a packet of cigarettes, and that cigarette packet is sold for $1. So it's almost like 100% value that we are actually losing out.
That's Vince Musewe, an economist who is giving us proposals about how Zimbabwe can reindustrialize. And we've already said that this is one of the pillars under NDS1. So Vince is going to be talking within that context. So join us in the second segment. Welcome to the second segment of Economic Forum, where we are discussing reindustrialization with economist Vince Musewe. Vince, you've got quite a number of proposals about how we can reindustrialize, and you've given us a historical background of where we've come from, what the colonial government did, and what we are doing as an independent government. We've gone through other policies, but you are talking to us within the context of the National Development Strategy 1.
Yes.
And we're talking about some of the policies that we have to implement in order to succeed in our industrialization. You can go ahead.
Yes, yeah. When you are coming up with an industrial policy, you have to look at three things. First, you have to look at product. The second, you have to look at capital, access to capital, right? The third, you have to look at skills and technology. So let me deal with them in that order. The first thing we have to do is to identify all the products that we are importing. You then come to the issue of capital. You then say, okay, now we've got this particular product. We want to reduce imports and actually begin to create. How much do we need? What is the capital budget that allows us to actually produce that? What industry do you have to set out? What institutional framework do you have to establish in order to actually make sure we begin to produce and build local capacity to produce that particular product? This is, you're going through by sector, right? You then say, okay, fine. Now that we've got this, do we have the capacity? Do we have the skills? Do we have the technology? Right? You then bring that technology, you have a project where you're actually bringing in that technology. Now, if it's a startup, for example, if it's a new, it needs to be protected. All economies in the world protect what we call infant industries. You establish that sector, you protect it, and you give it takes incentives so that you can attract capital investors to actually invest in that particular.
Why have we not been doing that, Vince? We've had several policy blueprints, Zim Asset, Zim Code, and many others included. Where did we get it wrong before you proceed?
I think as I'm articulating it to you, right, first of all, the minister might be able to articulate this herself. But secondly, we have to actually have a clinical approach, not a broad-based approach, right? And obviously the business sector is good. So to me, it's an issue of thinking very clearly what needs to be done, and then implementing that very clearly, and then measuring it, so that after 1 year, we then go back to the drawing table and say, listen, what have we done? We said we'll do this and this and this. This is what is there. And then, do you see what I'm saying? So we have an incremental kind of approach so that after year 3, we are no longer importing tissues.
Hence, we are about to complete this segment, but reality on the ground as we finish off this, tell us about why we failed even to resuscitate companies like Zesco. The other day I passed through Kadoma. There was a big dairy there. I saw it. It has become rusty, and so forth. The other one, Nature Gutu, again, it used to be a thriving textile factory. Yeah. All those are now malfunctioning. Just to conclude this for a viewer at home who is looking at reality, why have we failed? And we know with regards to Zisco, there have been several false starts, although that's being resumed again, but there have been quite a number of false starts. When are we going to get it right? Very briefly.
Let me briefly call some of the barriers that are challenges that we face now. When we look at these challenges, it's also important that we look at them as opportunities. So when I say it's a challenge, it's not a problem. It's something we can work on and actually begin to change the way things are. The first issue we must admit, I'm an economist and I know the impact of sanctions, right? Which actually has limited capital inflows into the country. A lot of people say it's a political statement. It is not. Let me give you an example. If you're a business in Zimbabwe doing exporting and you're doing transactions on the international money market, Zimbabwe is red flagged. Your transactions get delayed or whatever. So this actually delays and actually stifles economic activity.
That is our guest today, Vince Musewe, an economist who is talking about reindustrialization, as we said in our preamble, that it's one of the pillars on the National Development Strategy 1. And Vince is making his proposals as to how we can succeed under that blueprint. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can do so on the numbers that are showing on your screen. So join us in the third and final segment of today's Economic Forum. We're now in the third and final segment of Economic Forum, where today we're discussing reindustrialization with Vince Musewe, an economist. Vince, in the last segment, you were still trying to explain about capitalization. You were giving several scenarios where we can actually improve our capitalization.
Yes, what we've covered, we said there are 3 segments. We cover the issue of products, identify the key products that we must produce locally. We then say we need a capital budget. How are we going to fund this? And another fundamental key when it comes to the issue of capital, we need to protect local investment. We get excited by only attracting foreign investors. We need to incentivize local investors so that Zimbabweans can own companies in this country. So that's it, there can be tax incentives. Then the third issue I was talking about was the issue of skills, capacity building and technology transfer. Now, there is the fourth industrial revolution that is coming, where at the end of the day, the production sector is now being digitalized. Right? So we need to put into place a fourth industrial task force that looks at how we can transform industry by using new technologies. We don't want a case where an investor comes to a very old company that has got machinery that used to work in the 1960s.
Vince, talk about the mindset that with all these blueprints, at times it's difficult to transition. We're running with Zim Asset or we're running with ASAP, and suddenly there is NDS 1 and people feel left out. Do you feel that Zimbabweans are with the government on this strategy?
Right. Okay. For me, if I could give an example, there are about 15 economic blueprints that we have as a country since independence. We are very good. We are awesome academics. We are very good at writing very good documents, right, without actually implementing them, and everybody knows that. The issue is that when you appoint, I was talking to someone yesterday about Rwanda, and how Paul Kagame runs the country, right, where his ministers come up with a plan, right, and he gives you everything you need to implement that plan, right? And there's a constant evaluation where he sits down with them and see if they deliver. Apparently each February they sit. And if they don't deliver, they are kindly asked to leave. The other thing we need to do is we need a collaborative culture. No one has got a monopoly of ideas. I mean, there are people in the diaspora who've got awesome ideas. I was talking the other day, a Zimbabwean involved in electric vehicles in London. He's an engineer, who's created that. We have people involved in every sector who can expedite our development and implementation of these blueprints in Zimbabwe. And we need to attract those people back so that they don't have to be physically here. We can work with them in teams and actually begin to implement. The other issue is focus, right? We launch a product, we launch a plan, everybody gets excited. In the future, nobody ever asks what happens. Do you see what I'm saying? So leadership needs to focus on actually monitoring to ensure that all the plans that are articulated are actually also implemented. To me, those are the fundamental challenges we face.
Vince, let's talk about capacity. You mentioned the case of Rwanda, and in fact, the other day on Economic Forum, we had Mr. Lakson Zembe talking about capacity and the evaluation that we are talking about. Are you saying even in reindustrialization, His Excellency has to look at the capacity of the ministers and the other government officials, and in terms of being able to do the job and also giving them the necessary resources?
Okay, let me answer that in a holistic manner. Every structure gives you particular results, right? So when you look at results and you want to change those results, you have to look at the structure that is creating those results and change that structure so that it can create better results. It's a structural issue. First of all, I want to start with the budgeting process, right? The national budget. What happened with the national budget is that the Minister of Finance gets inputs from the various ministries and he puts them together, right? And then we were allocated resources, right? For me, that is the wrong way of doing things. What should happen? Each province should have a budget, right? And submit that budget to the minister, who then does a consolidation. Note, I said each province and not each ministry.
So, okay, one thing is very important.
Yes.
So, will devolution assist in that regard?
Absolutely. So, let me give you, I'm a province in Mutare. I know I've got fruit, agricultural sector and horticulture sector. I know we've got a lot of gold, right? And then how do I actually make sure that we exploit those? Do you see what I'm saying? So I put in my budget, this is my plan for the next 5 years, which I submit to the Minister of Finance, who then allocates the appropriate resources in order for me to implement, right? So it's turning things upside down. When you create that structure, the implementers are then responsible and not at national. That's a fundamental change we have to look at. The second issue, having got those resources, is there the capacity of financial management? Are we managing procurement? Are we managing corruption at the ground? So it's also now an issue of the value system and the skills base of the people who are given the responsibility to implement, right? That's the second issue. The third issue is monitoring and consequences for non-delivery. In other words, the president or whoever is in charge looks at what has happened regularly and then agrees on the outputs with the people, which is your performance management. And if people fail to deliver on those outputs, they face the consequences. So we are creating a performance culture. We're providing people with the necessary allocation of resources they need, and we're making sure they've got the skills. Because a lot of times, ministers argue that they never get enough money, right? But ministers, you find that if we allocate money according to ministry, we are missing out on a lot of things that should be happening at provincial level. To me, that is how I would manage the industrialization and the allocation of resources and the monitoring of the performance.
Having said all that, Vince, just give us a picture of what you are seeing in the future with all these proposals that you are making.
Yes.
You remember we outlined what industry used to look like in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and some of it closed down. And as you rightly say, some of the equipment is now obsolete. We don't expect to resuscitate Zisco with all the equipment that
Yes,
it had,
yeah,
or that dairy in Kadoma, which I was talking about, with all the equipment it has. And you mentioned digitization and so forth.
Yes.
So give us a picture of industry.
Of industry.
Remember, we were talking about what existed in Chegutu, in West Nicholson, in Mtare, Belmont, Bulawayo, and so forth. What is the picture that you are seeing after reindustrialization?
If we look at the big picture, the fundamental scenario we're facing now is that 70% of our GDP is coming from the informal sector. The formal sector is reducing, right? We have to turn that around so that we increase industrialization, increase the formal sector, right? And reduce the number of informal jobs from 70% of GDP to 10-15% of GDP, and then increase, accordingly the output of. So if you ask me what I would like to see, right, I would have a 20-year view of actually turning, creating a modern and rapid, modernized economy, where number one, Zimbabwe is basically the Singapore of Africa. Remember, there's the issue of Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We've got 1.2 billion consumers that we can serve as Zimbabwe, right? We have the resources, we have the intellect, right? And we can attract the appropriate. So my view is that in a 10 to 20 year period, Zimbabwe should be a Singapore of Africa.
Well, if you talk about 10 to 20 years, others will feel discouraged. Is there anything that we can see happening maybe gradually from the first 5 years to the next 10 years until 20 years?
Well, the NDS one is very clear, and I think it's a good document. It's a 300-page document that is very thorough. If it is implemented besides the politics, in other words, when 2023 comes and if we have the same government in and you change players, for example, you begin to put new people, they're starting from afresh. That has been one of our problems. Every 5 years, we'll restart. Do you see what I'm saying? So the NDS one is a good program, and we can consistently implement and measure what is within the NDS one, we can achieve these things I'm talking about. Yeah.
Well, that's Vincent Musewe, an economist who has been sharing his ideas about reindustrialization in Zimbabwe. As we said earlier on, reindustrialization is one of the main pillars of the National Development Strategy 1, where we said some of the objectives include the increase in manufacturing so that it goes right up to 30% in the contribution to GDP, and also to increase capacity. Vincent has given us the historical background as well as where we've gone wrong and what he proposes, and given us as well a big picture of what our industry will look like in the next 20 years. Vince, thank you very much for coming on to Economic Forum.
You're most welcome, John. Thank you.
And if you would like to get in touch with us, you can do so on the numbers that are showing on your screen. And also, in case you have missed some of the episodes of our program, you can watch them on our YouTube channel, which is Economic Forum Zimbabwe. And you can get in touch with us, like I said, on those various platforms that we are showing on our screen. So, on behalf of the production crew, this is John Musewe.